Okay, everyone, welcome to our presentation, The Future of Critical Thinking, Countering Cognitive Biases. My name's Guy.
John here.
So John, why are we so interested in this topic?
Great question. Well, let's start by looking at critical thinking. And the big part of critical thinking is problem solving. So let's start with by solving a problem. Let's see how you guys do. So imagine a bat and a ball together cost $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? I'll just give you a few seconds to think about that. Okay, you got a figure in your head? Did you think the ball was 10 cents? But 10 cents for the ball and the bat, $1.10, that would be $1.20, right? I'll be honest, I got this wrong. How did you guys do? How many of you got that 10 cents, said 10 cents? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just, so I mean, the correct answer is the ball is 5 cents, right? If we think about it, slow down our thinking a little bit. Ball 5 cents, bat $1.05 for a total of $1.10. Half the students at Harvard University got this wrong, so don't feel too bad about this. This was a question in Daniel Kahneman's book in 2011, Fast and Slow Thinking. Great book about cognitive bias. So basically, this little thought experiment shows that we have an adaptive bias to jump to conclusions. Most of us just jump right out and say 10 cents. Like, oh yeah, of course, it's 10 cents, right? Even people who get it right initially, still probably their first thought was 10 cents, right? And this shows basically that there's a tendency for us to rely on these thinking heuristics. These are like shortcuts, right? Unconscious behavior, unconscious decisions that we rely on to get through our day. All right, it's much faster than making slow, more conscious decisions. And this leads to biases. So here's a bias. People generally tend to view their opinions as being that of the consensus, right? So you can test this in class. Have your students react to a few debatable statements. Here's a few, right? The 2020 Olympics should have never commenced. Same-sex marriage should be legalized in Japan. Affirmative action programs are needed for women to be equal in the workplace. For each item, I asked the students to indicate whether they agreed or disagreed with the statement and their estimation of how many students in the class, the percentage of those students share hold the same view, basically, as what the students thought. Not sure. Sorry. I think Guy's might be having problems, right?
Yeah, I think his screen froze again, maybe.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm having a bit of problem with my connection here. Let me just quickly get that back up. Sorry, John, there you go.
Yeah, no problem. That's fine. So most students, between 75 and 87% agreed with these statements, right? But many thought that their classmates agreed as well. So 65 to 75, a little bit lower than what they imagined. But what's more surprising is that of the students who disagreed, the 13 to 25% who disagreed, they thought that their classmates also disagreed, 75 to 80%. So this shows the false consensus bias. It's a very simple experiment that you can do in your own classroom just to show students that they're susceptible to these biases. All right. So 3 years ago, Guy and I kind of got involved in this area, and we walk from our school to the station, and it's a good 20-30 minute walk. And we started off just talking about like what are biases. That's how our conversation kind of started. And we did a few presentations, and we found out that a lot of people didn't know like what cognitive biases are and how they manifest and so on. And over the years, Guy and I, as we present more and more on this topic, and we've done a good number of presentations now, that it's kind of evolved into like, how do we mitigate these biases? How do we debias, in other words? And many of the people that we present to actually have some really good ideas on this topic. So like there's been quite a transformation in the last 3 years about, I think, about especially what we know, and also what the audiences are bringing to our presentations. So yeah, so we're going to go into, Guy's going to explain a little bit about what we hope to achieve in our presentation this evening.
Yeah, so there are two points we really want to look at today. First is a deeper understanding of cognitive bias and the importance for critical thinking. And the other thing is, what can we do about cognitive bias in our classrooms? So Steven Pinker, Harvard professor of psychology, has said that many psychologists have called on their field to give debiasing away as one of the greatest potential contributions to human welfare. In this case, debiasing means, to prevent and control for cognitive bias. And a 2021 paper also called for a deeper understanding of the natural cognitive biases of critical thinking. It's kind of important to understand there's a bit of tension between views of critical thinking, a bit of conflict here. On the one hand, we have the broad view of the philosophical view, which is that we can do better thinking, we can achieve better thinking, and we can get to higher levels. But the psychological point of view says that might not be possible, just because of the basic design of the mind, the human mind. We have cognitive mechanisms that underlie and filter our thinking processes, and certain levels of thinking may just not be accessible to us. So John and I, our perspective is that the future of critical thinking is a bigger emphasis on the psychological side of thinking. So we'd like to define cognitive bias. These are subjective tendencies or predispositions in thinking. They can often be very useful for us, but they can sometimes lead to some mistakes or undesirable outcomes in thinking and decision making. Some of the big ones, the famous ones: in-group bias, authority bias, the halo effect, anchoring, groupthink, my-side bias. If you are interested in knowing more about these, you can do a search for the Cognitive Bias Codex at the bottom here. There's a long list of biases, and it also groups them into ways they are useful and ways they can be negative. So one of the key points for our presentation today is an understanding that cognitive bias is more or less hardwired. A lot of people compare it to the visual system. For example, on the left, we can see two checkerboards. If you look at the far left checkerboard, A and B look like a different color. If you look at the other checkerboard, you can see that they are actually the same color. If you look back at the left side, they look like a different color. There's nothing we can do to change that. It's just the way our visual system is set up. On the right, you can see the duck looking to the left or the rabbit looking to the right, but you can't see them at the same time. If you pay very close attention, you can see either the rabbit or either the duck. So this is a very good way to understand cognitive bias. Some of the biases are so deeply wired into our thinking, we just can't recognize them. Others of them are also deeply wired, but if we pay very close attention, we can do something about them. Another thing is, in the literature, you'll sometimes hear bias described as irrational or rational. This can be very confusing. For example, auditory looming. Now, this bias is when we hear a loud noise coming towards us, we hear that as approaching us as faster than it really is. So technically, that's a mistake. you're not getting the real speed. However, if you think about it, a herd of buffalo or a herd of elephants are rapidly approaching you. Having a bit more time to get out of that situation is a great decision for you. It's very rational. So from one point of view, they are mistakes. From a different point of view, they can be very rational. So that's why the literature is sometimes a bit confusing about this. One of the big ones for critical thinking, a very important one, the halo effect. So this is the tendency to be influenced by positive impressions of someone. For example, someone is very physically attractive, has a very confident poise, they are praised by others. This can create an impression, a halo effect. The benefit from an evolutionary point of view is that a good physical appearance was an indication of good health, and therefore probably a good mate. But the drawback is that, if the halo effect is in action, that may lead to some kind of biased perspective where that person's opinion is given greater weight than it deserves. So they have both positive sides and negative sides, which makes it very interesting, but also quite complex. Okay, next John is going to lead us into what we can do about cognitive bias in our classrooms.
Yeah, so Guy kind of gave you just a basic touch about what cognitive biases are and how they work. We just want to turn our attention to something more practical, and maybe something you want to hear more about, and that's basically like how do we approach these things? How do we mitigate these negative outcomes, and really enhance critical thinking? So again, just to kind of restate what Guy kind of was talking about is, some of us may think like, well, why don't we just teach them? Like, this is the halo effect, this is another bias, and there's a definition, this is what it means, and so we can do all these tricks and stuff. But would that really work? Would that really like help our students learn about biases? Well, it can help, especially with certain biases. But overall, even if we can use some mitigating strategies, the amount of biases and the effect that would have would be minimal. There's a great article that came out last year by Cristo and Santos. Basically, they just divide all the biases into two groups. Ones are called encapsulated biases. These are really difficult ones that you just can't penetrate the information processing that's going on. Now, Guy talked about that. Just if we look at the solution again, we just can't get, even if we go over to the right and look at, okay, all the hues are the same, but if we go back to the left, they still look different. We can't get past it. And other biases that fit into this would be like implicit associations. If I close your eyes and I said, well, imagine the nurse. Would the nurse be female or male? Is unfortunately, maybe a lot of us would have a female in our minds. And we could play this with many other things to show the power of implicit associations. But these are biases that we just can't get to, and maybe we need to admit that and move on. And the other type of biases that Santos, go ahead.
Sorry, John, can I just jump in there? So the visual illusion here, the name is the simultaneous lightness contrast. So you could teach students that, and you could teach them how it works and all the details and everything about that, but it will not help them see the left image in any different way. So that's kind of like how biases can work. You can teach them about the halo effect and in-group bias, but it won't help them mitigate or prevent the effect. That's why a lot of people compare the visual system to the cognitive system.
Right, thanks, Guy. And if we move into the second group, these are called attentional biases, and these are biases that actually can be mitigated, but it takes extreme effort and attention to do so. So even if people understand that these biases can be, again, mitigated, they seldom, like, imagine all the decisions that we make every day, the amount of effort and the amount of time and attention that would be needed to go through and slowly think through all these decisions would be extremely tiresome. So again, re-emphasizing what Guy said, like this, the hardwired nature of biases makes it really hard for us to mitigate the negative outcomes. So other processes we already know and we can control for some important outcomes of biases. So let's look at maybe from a different perspective and look at what are some outcomes that these biases are putting us in, are leading us towards. So some of these outcomes can be divided into positive and negative. Actually, there are some positive outcomes that the paper came out last year, I believe. Guy, I think you know maybe a little bit more about this. But basically, the researchers found that there's certain biases, when they're paired together, they kind of work against each other. And they actually, in some kind of weird, bizarre way, actually enhances the decision-making process. There's only a few in only certain situations. It's only one paper, maybe two papers right now, but it's a kind of a new avenue that research is trying to observe more and examine that issue. There's also some negative ones, of course. The strong body of research says that there's factors that are impeding critical thinking, impeding open-mindedness, and rethinking.
Okay, so that leads us into our first suggestion for teachers who are interested in preventing and mitigating cognitive bias, which is the open-mindedness, targeting open-mindedness. So we know that cognitive bias can reduce open-mindedness. We would like to suggest a hand-washing approach as a practical approach for looking at this. Bulick and Kenyon have suggested focusing on groups of biases. So that's what the hand-washing approach does. So we know that we have a negative outcome of cognitive bias, reduced open-mindedness. And the group could be the halo effect, authority bias, my side bias, ostrich effect, and many other biases. Therefore, if you promote open-mindedness, you can expect to somewhat mitigate. Not completely, that's very difficult, but somewhat mitigate one important negative effect for critical thinking of this bias family. So how would that look in your classroom? Let's imagine we have a group of beginner level students and the discussion is about the best pet and you want to promote open-mindedness. So you might start with brainstorming individually, avoid groupthink, halo effect, various other social biases. Then you might collect those ideas and present them anonymously to the group. You would have some red teams. A red team is a person or group whose job it is to ask for reasons for all pet ideas. So one student in the group might be always saying, why dog? Why cat? Why koala? Then you'd have them ranking the top 10 pets, and then you might stop the discussion and introduce some unusual pets. How about giraffes? So you can see that the open-mindedness promoting strategies are sprinkled in there. Okay, they're just woven into the class itself. If we look at something at a higher level, an argumentative essay position, step one, you might again have students individually research sides of an issue, avoid my side bias, halo effect, etc. All of the social biases. You would present them anonymously to the class, create red teams to ask, why is that a good idea? What are the advantages? You might require students to underline or reread arguments they do not agree with. Okay, promoting open-mindedness again. Then you'd have the students review their class notes and decide their individual essay position. So once again, the open-mindedness promoting strategies are woven into the steps of the class itself. So this, just to go back to hand washing, over the last couple of years, we've all done a lot of hand washing, a lot of disinfecting. But basically, you don't know if viruses are on your hands or not. But hand washing can cover that possibility without any drawbacks. So our suggestion is that if we integrate open-mindedness increasing tasks, first, we don't know if, how, when cognitive bias is emerging or present. It's just too difficult to know that. But by putting open-mindedness promoting tasks, you're covering that possibility whether or not it happens. And there's no drawbacks. I couldn't find any research which suggests that open-mindedness, promoting open-mindedness is a bad thing. Okay, John's going to have a look at our second suggestion.
Thanks, Guy. So yeah, approach number 2, again, we're just going to combine the hand washing with the combining inside and outside interventions and thinking frameworks. And what exactly does that mean? Kind of coming back to this paper I mentioned before, Crystal and Santos. Basically, they're talking about some biases are, we can get at, right? They can be overcome through awareness, and these are called attentional biases. Right? However, it's very challenging for people to harness that reflection and attend to the right kind of information during their moment of decision. So we need to kind of promote rethinking, because it's being hindered. The biases attack, this rethinking process. So what do? Well, we need to rely on reminders and benchmarks at key stages in the decision-making process. We need to build in accountability mechanisms. And I'll give you some examples for what that means. Right. Well, but what does this mean for CT in the classroom? Well, we just need to introduce individual, reflective, or slow down critical thinking strategies, and also buttress this effect with outside interventions that encourage rethinking, kind of like a two-pronged attack, right? Have this kind of two-pronged strategy in the classroom to make sure that rethinking is happening. So again, this is reduced rethinking. And the biases that really attack this are the halo effect, authority bias, my side bias, the ostrich effect, and there's many others. So you can see like how the halo effect, if somebody comes in the room is very charismatic, very attractive, we don't even think about really what they say. We're just like, yeah, okay, I agree with them, So there's no rethinking going on there, or at least less of it. Right. So we need to promote an increased rethinking and mitigate at least this group of biases. So one combination sounds simple, right? But an individual or an inside critical thinking strategy would be sleep on it. All right. It's likely to have a positive effect in mitigating many of these biases. It just simply slows down the process. Now, it just sounds like it's a very reasonable thing, but to actually have students to go slowly through your activities, making sure students have enough time to think through their ideas carefully is instrumental. And we can combine with this sleep on it with an outside intervention by just having group discussion, sharing ideas, and again, not rushing this process, mixing up viewpoints. And this encourages rethinking. And again, it's not going to nullify all these biases, but it will definitely help in mitigating them. And going to like a writing exercise, the sample combination number 2, again, this would just be something like writing down the thinking process. Having students use outlines likely has positive effects in mitigating many biases. It slows down the process. And combine this with an outside intervention. Again, you can use a teacher-prepared thinking checklist, having questions embedded in like an e-portfolio or some kind of writing template. Have I applied different types of evidence? Have I considered counter arguments? You can also ask like questions that ask about their metacognition, like throughout the process. So again, this also is not going to eliminate the biases, but definitely will hinder them from being realized.
Okay, thanks, John. So just a quick summary of what we talked about today. So cognitive biases are really important for critical thinking because they underlie a lot of our thinking processes and filter our conscious thinking before it becomes conscious. They are more or less hardwired, so this makes it very difficult to say, oh, there's the ostrich effect, I'm going to do something about it. So those 2 points are very important for teachers who are thinking about preventing and mitigating bias in their classes. So our suggestions, based on the research, is that we know there are at least 2 big negative impacts of cognitive bias on critical thinking. That is reduced open-mindedness and reduced rethinking. Those 2 are very clear in the literature. So we suggest apply a hand-washing approach. Just integrate activities that promote open-mindedness and rethinking without trying to figure out if the ostrich effect is happening at this moment in this student. which is just really difficult to do. So our first suggestion, just sprinkle in strategies and activities that promote open-mindedness and rethinking. Second, combine inside and outside interventions, the individual and the group, to magnify your regular critical thinking strategies, their positive impact on cognitive bias. And the third one we suggest, which we didn't really talk about today, teach students about the strategies. Not so much the biases, but the strategies. For example, I often explain why brainstorming individually is better than brainstorming as a group. And students sometimes come to me after class and say, oh, I've always done it as a group, but now I see why it might be better sometimes to brainstorm individually before working as a group. Okay, that's it from us. If we have time for a few questions, that would be nice.
Yes, of course. Yeah, if anybody's got any questions, you can just turn on your mic and ask. That's fine. Go ahead. I can't see everybody here. Any questions for John and Guy? Really interesting presentation. Thank you. And some good strategies. I like those sort of sprinkling in. Nice to get kids to think, especially I think maybe in Japan, where it's collective thinking and collective, being part of the group and is very culturally important. Yeah, so I think that's really.
Yeah, sorry, Jackie, just thank you for that. One point is sometimes you see resources out there that say, oh, you can stop my side bias by doing A, B, C, but it's much more complex than that. Those resources are putting forward a very, very strong position that is not really supported by the literature. So just be careful about resources that say, oh, to stop confirmation bias, do A, B, C. First, you have to know whether confirmation bias is emerging or not. Which bias? I mean, it could be that the student is just hungry today. They missed breakfast. That's why they're not getting it or doing it. So at the moment, the literature suggests that these general interventions are the best way to go if you're interested in trying to combat cognitive bias in your groups and students.
Right. Yeah. I guess, as you said, it's hard to tell really what's going on. So sort of going at it generally is maybe a better strategy. Yeah. Oh, good. Right. And any other questions from anyone? Please feel free. One thing I looked up while you were presenting was the IKEA effect. I was very curious. What is this? But apparently we like furniture better if we put it together a little bit by ourselves.
Yes,
interesting.
That's
right.
That's quite a strong effect. It's had a couple of studies done on it. So if we make something, we put a higher value on it.
Right.
So a lot of companies are using that strategy now to have people construct their own furniture or make something themselves. We just assign higher value to it. And of course, we're more likely to go back to the company and buy their products again because we feel better about the whole process.
Right. Well, IKEA is doing very well, so they've definitely they're a good sign that is true. Oh, right. Well, thank you very much, John. Thank you very much for a lovely presentation.